Let's get started with the panel. I'll read the bios and then I'll hand it over to my good friend David here, who will kick us off tonight. And we'll start with David. So from his early days twinkling with test tubes and differential equations as an award-winning scientist to leading top-performing sales teams at high-growth tech startups, David Priemer brings a lifelong passion for uncovering the hidden insights in the world around us to his practice as the founder of Cerebral Selling. Previously, he held several executive leadership positions at companies like Salesforce, where he was a VP of Commercial Sales and creator of the Sales Leadership Academy program. He's also an adjunct professor at the Smith School of Business at Queen's University. Next, and a round of applause for our good friend David. David should also mention one of his accolades is speaking on the panel of SalesTO previously to this. Michael is the co-founder and CEO of leading video marketing platform Vidyard. While he's not bringing leading video-based technologies to market, he serves as a general partner of Garage Capital, a seed stage fund focused on supercluster companies looking to expand into Silicon Valley. He also sits on the Communitech board of directors in a KW-based organization designed to help companies grow and succeed. Mike is also the reason for my career in sales and how I got into sales. So big round of applause for Mike. Maybe he'll share the story tonight. And lastly, we have Chris. Chris is the CEO and co-founder of Dooley, the world's first real-time adaptive sales playbook platform, and a leader in the tech industry with over 20 years of experience. Before founding Dooley, he held senior consulting and management positions in sales for companies like Mobify and led Vision Critical as their EVP of International Sales and EVP of Corporate Strategy from its early days to revenue in excess of $100 million. Round of applause for Chris tonight. All right, Priemer, I'll let you kick it off. Good luck.
All right, well, thank you very much. It's honestly an honor to be here. I always feel grateful to be part of the Toronto tech community and the Canadian tech community, especially with these great leaders. And so I think we can go toe-to-toe with any tech community out there in any city. And so very, very grateful to be part of it. And thank you all for coming out today. You know, you want to applause for that or no? No? All right, you know, you don't have to. I'm just, you know, you don't have to applause. So here's kind of what I was thinking of doing with the time we have here today with our two CEOs. So I have this concept I often talk about called the CEO petting zoo. And what that means is, you know, CEO, does anyone here sell to CEOs? Sometimes, you know, we're supposed to call hi, right? Call to the CEO. Well, the thing with CEOs is when you see them in the wild, they'll bite your hand off if you try to reach out, right? But here they're very docile, they're very, you know, accommodating. And so this is our opportunity to ask them some questions that you would not get to ask them in the wild. So that's kind of number one. And number two, you didn't sign up for that? All right, we're going to skip over those questions and go right to the second session of questions, which is really to give you a sense for, like, what do these guys think about when they think about revenue and growth and the things that are being asked of them from their boards and VCs, to give you a little bit of a window into that in case you want to start your own business one day, but also because, you know, you could be selling to these fine men. So what I had for you is to start off with a very simple question. You know, oftentimes we call into CEOs and, you know, we don't know what the heck they do every day. Right? So thinking about what do these guys do every day when you're trying to call on them and understand what their day looks like, let's just start off with that. What do you do every day? And I will say, having worked in lots of startups with CEOs, sometimes the CEOs have to explain to the people at their own company what they do every day, right? Because you don't see them, right? Like there needs to be some sense of like how they're spending their time to drive the company forward. So curious. So Mike, how do you spend your day?
This is a very good question.
That's why I asked it.
Yeah. I'm going to test an analogy that I've been trying to use to describe this. So I'm a founder CEO, and I think there's a big difference between a founder CEO and a hired-in CEO with respect to the way you approach your business. But way back in the day, like 7 years ago, when we started the company, the analogy I use is that Vidyard was like a river of opportunity. This is going to sound crazy, but just bear with me. And what we wanted to do is capture energy from that river. And so your job as a founding team is to start and build a dam, right? Dam is going to be a power generation service. You're going to collect energy from that. Your business is going to grow. And the challenge is, at first, you don't really know how to build a dam. The river's moving too fast. Some rivers are really big. markets are amazing. Some are just little wee creeks, right? And that is kind of the analogy for your TAM and the scale of your opportunity. Our river was quite big, and I don't think we realized how big it truly was. And so you kind of build the foundations of a dam, and that ends up being the product that you use to service that market, and then you start to build your processes to scale and build into that opportunity. And at some point, you have a little bit of a dam that's capturing a little bit of that water, capturing a little bit of energy out of that market. And Devin, my co-founder, and I would regularly stand back and look at that dam and look for leaks. And when we'd find a leak, one of us would decide to go and plug that leak with our finger while looking for someone that was much better at plugging that leak than we were somewhere else in the ecosystem in the market. So we could go on and build another piece of that dam. Of course, sometimes the person that you bring in to plug that leak starts to kind of get a little loose, and then your job is to fire that person and hire someone who's better at plugging that leak, and ideally leaks around it that you didn't even know existed. And I like that analogy because, you know, I think it describes kind of the overarching essence of the founder CEO who is building this thing from scratch and remembers exactly what it was look like when there was no dam. And I think when you're approaching CEOs, you have to consider the fact that there is not one single thing they do or one single pain that they feel on a regular basis, because minute to minute, day by day, there's a different issue with the dam that they're ultimately focused on fixing. Now, when you have that dam holding water and it's collecting energy, then you can start looking for other rivers, right? And that's when the job gets fun, because you can start these things from scratch. Does that analogy make any sense? Yeah? Cool. That's what I do. I'm a dam builder.
There you go. No, you know, and it's funny. I've heard that analogy described in other ways. I'm sure you've heard like the Lego analogy, where you know you have this big pile of Legos, and you're kind of building your tower, and the goal is to give away your Legos to other people who can kind of build bigger towers and think of different things, right? Yeah. But the idea is you get sometimes very defensive of your little Lego tower, but the goal is if you want to grow and scale, you have to give it away, like your analogy of finding new rivers. Yeah. Chris, what do you think? What do you do every day?
I have a totally different analogy. It's about a creek. I'm kidding.
Is it brown?
My day starts off very well intended. I think every CEO's day starts off really well intended, and then by about 9 o'clock, everything goes to hell in a handbasket. So you end up doing something completely different than what you thought you were going to do during the day. Depending on the stage you're at as a CEO, you're going to be more intimate with different parts of the business. We're a little smaller than Vidyard right now. I say right now. I don't mean that we're going to catch up to you or anything. It's not a race. But we're a little smaller than Vidyard right now. So I spend a little bit more of my time thinking about product. And I think until you scale a little bit further, you're probably going to be the person that's the most intimate in terms of your understanding of product and how it connects to the marketplace. So I do spend a lot of my time thinking and worrying about that and what we should be doing next and how to apply our energy within the business. There's still a lot of the day-to-day things, which is setting the tone, setting the culture for the business, and worrying about who you bring in, because every hire, particularly when you're quite small, is incredibly important. I call them the pillar hires for our business. So I do spend a lot of my time focused on that as well. And I think that one thing that's really, really important as a CEO is you don't just set the tone, you set the pace. And so you do have to show up, and how you show up is how everybody else is going to show up as well. So, you know, I try to drive that energy across the entire business as well. So I think that's what I would add to what you were saying.
It's true. Interestingly, there's a lot of data that talks about how the culture of an organization is formed, and they say about 80% of the organizational culture actually comes from the leader. And they actually go back to a little study that they did on Mark Zuckerberg when he was building Facebook, and they went through this exercise that he actually stole, I think, from Microsoft or Google, and it was called the One of Us exercise. And the idea was to write down, like, what does it mean to be one of us at our company? What does it mean to be one of us? And they had their 10 things, and as when you look at the list of the 10 that were at Facebook, it was like Zuckerberg, right? So we tend to create sometimes our companies in our own image. But let me ask you, so here's my second and last CEO petting zoo question, as it were. So one of the things that exists a lot of times in modern sellings is this concept I call experience asymmetry. So the idea is for most of us, most of our selling organizations, we have younger, less experienced sales reps calling on more senior decision makers whose job they've never done. right? So you're trying to call into a CMO, a VP of sales. You've never been, in most cases, you've never sat in that chair. So one of the things that we always try to do is give our teams a sense of like, what is it that, the people in that chair care about? And so a few years ago when I was at Salesforce, I took my team up to Collingwood for our sales kickoff. Flew some reps in from New York and so on. We went up to Collingwood and I called up a buddy of mine, Andrew Angus, who is the CEO of a company called Switch Video, which Mike's company acquired. And Andrew said, hey, look, we can use his spot, his office for the day. And we did a little CEO petting zoo, and we interviewed him. We said, Andrew, you were a Salesforce customer. We're trying to sell into you. Give us a window of how decisions get made at your company, right? Because this is like a very secret thing. How does decisions get made? Because we're all really curious about selling into some of these companies. How do those decisions get made? So I'm curious at your companies, and of course it might depend on the product and how much it costs, but in general, how are buying decisions made? So if one of these folks is trying to sell into you, is it, we should call into you, Mike, because you make all the purchasing and budgeting decisions, or do you kind of push that down? How does that work in your company?
Yeah, I think the short answer is it depends. I mean, there's a myriad of ways into our business, and depending on the stage that we are at, the purchasing process changes. And so we just went through a cycle, and again, this is kind of real talk, where we had a leader in the business who was structuring a really great process where every single leader, basically from director down, had a budget. And they could do whatever the hell they wanted inside of that budget. It was a terrible fucking idea. And we are rewinding that because we have 165 technologies in our stack. And there's redundancies, there's overlap, and we're like not even quite 300 people. There's like half a piece of software per capita in the company, which is absolutely ridiculous. And so right now, based on the way we're building our DAM, we are very conscious of only purchasing items that are enabling growth or better efficiency inside of the organization, period. And so that can obviously touch multiple organizations. So it has to hit those two criteria. Then it gets benchmarked against everything else we already have to determine that we don't have a piece of software that can already solve that solution. We have a RevOps organization that every piece of software that is related to marketing, selling, supporting, basically our go-to-market efforts goes through. And we've got this really kind of wise gentleman named Julian in that role. And he's a grinder. And his job...
Julian is definitely a grinder. I've dealt with Julian.
Yes. Is to pay as little as possible for the software. Now, one of the interesting things that often happens is, and this is kind of like something you should watch out for and you've probably all seen, is when CEOs start talking and the CEO of company X wants to sell the CEO of company Y and the deal exchange happens. And the deal exchange is often in search of revenue and not necessarily in search of productivity. It's called the round trip. This is a possibility for you to get in through the CEO, but is not recommended for good quality selling because those deals generally always fall apart because there isn't a true need inside of the organization and you've got two ignorant CEOs chasing growth. I could go on and on and on, but I think the TLDR on this is when we were very small, software purchasing decisions ultimately rolled up to me. Then we had a CFO who would approve the purchase based on budget, and I would be involved in the decision-making process based on the company's need. As the companies grow, that becomes more disparate, and process starts to formulate. So if you're selling into a 200 to 300 person high-growth company, there's going to be a purchasing structure there. If you're selling into a company with less than 50 employees, there probably isn't a purchasing process there. And we sell, as an organization, our sales solution, marketing solution, and support solution into a bunch of different segments. So we sell into sub-50 employees, SME, mid-market, and key accounts. And as you go up those segments, the deal cycles extend significantly, and it's a function of the amount of consideration in the process and the amount of consensus required. And our sub-50 category, average sales cycle, and this is the second quarter for this team, there's 2 reps, they both crushed quota in their first quarter, is like less than 5 days. And in key accounts, it's north of a year. And so every style of sale into every size of organization, I think, differs, and that's an important point.
Very good. You triggered me with the swap deals, as they're often called, when two VPs of sales or CEOs trade products, and then it becomes a game of chicken to see who's going to attrit first. Yeah, right? It's like, oh, they traded, oh no.
It just causes pain and distraction for everyone involved.
Yeah.
Avoid it at all costs.
Value selling. Agreed. Chris?
Yeah, there's actually a joke along those lines that I heard at Dreamforce this year, which is that SaaS companies exist to sell to other SaaS companies. And same thing as Mike. When you want to think about how you sell into our org, or any org for that matter, it does depend on the complexity of your product and who it touches. I'll flip it around a little bit. We both sell, I would say, a more user-centric technology. So we tend to go in through users when people are starting to touch and interact with the product, and then we move our way up to the head of sales or the head of customer success. Where I was previous to Dooley at Vision Critical, I had a general rule of thumb that for every $10,000 in revenue the deal was worth, you could add a buyer to the process, which means that the complexity of it gets harder and more nuanced. And if you weren't adding a buyer, chances are that deal was going to extend into infinity. You could sell forever and ever and ever. And I think it's a danger of a lot of salespeople is that you do get happy ears because you're talking to somebody. And as a result, you end up with a deal that's going to go nowhere. In our org, yeah, we're smaller, so chances are it's going to hit my desk and I'm going to act as Julian would in terms of grinding it down. We're fortunate in that a lot of the partners that we deal with right now are actually very startup friendly, so we end up getting pretty favorable pricing. But then it's about making sure you're not burdening your tech stack. If you have 10, 15, 20 pieces of software in your sales stack, you're starting to get to the point where you're not going to even know what your logins are for a lot of these things. And I've done this test with companies I've consulted with in the past. At Mobify, when I was doing consulting there, the head of sales prior was literally acquiring software ad nauseum. Like there was so much software in their stack. And so I went around to all the salespeople and I said, okay, how many of you know that you have this piece of software in place? How many of you have actually logged into this piece of software? And based on that, we were actually able to cut their software tech stack in half, which is an enormous amount of money. That's a headcount that you could be using, or maybe 2 headcount or 3 headcount that you could be using for other things.
No, I mean, look, so there's a certain amount of oversight, certainly, making sure they're making good purchasing decisions, and I thought it was very helpful feedback. Hopefully, if you're trying to sell to one of these kind of sizes of organizations, you leave with some good insights here. So enough with the CEO petting zoo. I want to kind of go back to the beginning, right? So at the beginning, you let's say the first salesperson. You're kind of out there grinding it in the trenches, and you're trying to figure out, okay, when is the right time to hand it off to someone else? And when I hand it off to someone else, maybe another salesperson, we're not talking about a sales leader just yet, what kind of qualities do I need to look for in that particular kind of salesperson? Oftentimes, when I was hiring for my startups in the sales role, I would interview candidates and I would say, you'd be a really good 20th sales rep, but not the first or not the second, right? So I'm curious, as you kind of loosen the reins and you hand it off to someone, Chris, we'll start with you, what kind of qualities did you look for in that first, second, third salesperson?
So I'll say just off the top, always hire to your values. If you don't hire to your values, you're going to make a mistake. I've seen this so many times where you want the person who you think is going to slay the biggest dragon, somebody that's going to bring in an enormous deal, and frankly, that person is not going to work out for a number of different reasons. Hire to the stage that you're at and where your customers are at in terms of what they can buy from you. I would say that hiring the amazing enterprise salesperson at our company right now would be a complete disaster. So what we hire to are our values. We hire around empathy, which came as our #1 value across our organization. And I will always look for people who are empathetic because our product is actually quite an empathetic product. But we'll also look for people, particularly in sales, that are incredibly curious. I love people who are just naturally curious about what you do, how you do it, understanding the nuances of how the technology works and how it can make somebody's life better. They tend to be able to storytell a lot better, in my opinion, because they understand what they are selling. So natural curiosity for me is probably my #1 selling criteria I look for, other than some of the soft skills that go around selling as well. Can you carry a room? Can you engage in a conversation? The other thing I look for is adaptability. somebody that can adjust to different types of conversations with different types of people. I can tell you right now that selling in New York is very different than selling in California, which is very different still again from selling in London or Amsterdam or anywhere else. And you need to have somebody who can adjust to the different types of personalities they're selling to. If they can't, they're going to lose way more than they're going to win.
I agree. Yeah, Mike, what do you think?
So I'll tell the story of our first sales hire, who was probably an accidental hire in the grand scheme of things, in that he in no way fit the mold of a salesperson. And I'm trying to figure out if I will protect his identity, because he's now built a very successful career elsewhere. This individual, so we started the company in a house in Waterloo, and we wrote a lot of the code in my dorm room. And there was a couple companies operating the house. One was Alerta, which created the Impulse smartwatch, which became the Pebble smartwatch. A company called Twitsprout, which Dan Hollowak runs. A lot of you may know Dan Hollowak. He was a roommate as well. And then Vidyard. And we were having a party in the house. And it wasn't, I owned the house with my brother. This was not an official party. And there was an individual sitting on the couch in the living room when I came upstairs from my bedroom, rolling a marijuana cigarette. This is now a legal thing.
Selling high.
Pardon me?
Selling high.
Yeah. And this individual wasn't wearing any shoes, and we started talking, and he had just started a sales job at IBM. And we had just come back from Y Combinator, and we're thinking of scaling the team. And I just got so excited about the fact that this person was trained by IBM, and I knew absolutely nothing about sales. Like, I'm an engineer by training, and so just worked on this individual and massaged his ego for months and months and months, trying to get him to join the company, and he eventually did, and turned out to be a very successful sales rep, because he did not need a The one thing he taught me, and the one thing he learned from IBM, was you have 2 ears and one mouth, and use them in that ratio. And it was this concept of listening and not talking and not pitching that he pounded into my head and into everybody's head. And we had no sales process. He had a very simple lifestyle because he just graduated from school as well. And so didn't have huge financial needs. And so could survive on a base salary without making a bunch of commission on sales, because that's where he was in his life. And for the first year of being in the company, by all intrinsic purposes, he would have been a very ineffective salesperson, right? He wasn't even close to the quotas we'd set. But he was learning a lot from the customer and feeding that back into our product development cycles. And eventually became a kind of like a certified expert in the field that we were selling in. There was this forum called Topliners, which was built by Eloqua, a great Toronto company, and and he became amazing story. And we would not be here if it wasn't for Eloqua. Longer story, but he became this certifiable expert. And to your point, he was selling to VPs of marketing and CMOs at other companies because he had developed empathy for what they were going through by just ingratiating himself, probably while very high in their process. And for all intrinsic purposes, this person was like, you could call this person a hippie. And I've got so many amazing stories about this individual. And it's very heartwarming just to think about him. But that was our first sales hire. And ultimately what we did from there was we layered in a resource that helped. So when he would find an opportunity, he'd bring me in, we'd sell it together. Eventually, we got a process going, and we hired someone who found those opportunities and brought them to this individual. And then that person became a sales rep, and we hired a few more people to find those opportunities, and that was kind of the beginning of our BDR program. And so our vision of what a salesperson was evolved, and eventually this individual kind of ejected from the organization because we developed process, et cetera, that wasn't necessarily a fit for their style. And we brought in a leader that didn't really like their style either. But the first sales rep is definitely not going to be the same as your last.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing is that the skill set that you needed to be successful in those early days is different than what it would be later on. And in fact, if you're looking to read a really good book on this, the Sales Acceleration Formula by Mark Roberge, who is the VP of Sales at HubSpot, So HubSpot was just founded by all these MIT engineer grads, and so what they did was they did this very scientific approach where they would interview people, grade them against all these different competencies, do a regression analysis in their CRM to how they would correlate to success in the role, and then started hiring for those things. And they were things like curiosity and coachability and those kinds of things. But Roberge will tell you in the book, he says, don't do what I do. Okay, don't do what I did, because it worked for the first 9 months of our company, and then our product changed and pivoted, and we needed a different skill set, and then the things were different. But the idea is that if you're looking to hire, try to figure out what it is unique about your organization, your needs, right, and hire for that and develop a methodology. So we're not getting into all that today, but be mindful about that first or second or third hire, because they're going to help you grow the sales organization, right? So
Be cerebral.
Be cerebral about it. Just slip that
And
in
actually,
there.
there's something I just wanted to add to that really quickly, and maybe it's a question you're going to ask. I was going to talk about how you as a CEO can sell, and then you start hiring people and they can't sell, and you're like, these people suck.
Yes.
Can I reference that, or is this coming?
Yeah, we can touch on that right now. If you
Well,
want.
I think this is a common thing, and I was actually talking to one of our investors about it, and he was interesting enough complimenting me on digging into the sales process. And you very rarely get compliments from your investors, so it was a particularly memorable moment for me. And he was saying he sees a lot of CEOs that raise some money and then blame lack of growth on like their sales team and their sales leader, and how that's kind of horseshit, because they were doing well at a point and then it stopped working. And so I was thinking about this, and one of the things that this first salesperson had, and I had as the first salesperson before him in the company, was that I had the ability to take customer feedback and inject it into product and inject it into marketing and solve those problems dynamically as they came up. Because your product and your sale is not going to be repeatable until it's repeatable, and it's going to take a long time to hit that level of repeatability. And so when you start hiring people who are career salespeople who've never been in a startup before, so somebody that has a big swinging resume comes into the organization and expects all these resources and all these leads and all these things, because a lot of these very seasoned sales leaders are effectively order takers. And in your startup, you're not taking orders. You're serving up a brand new dish for every single customer that makes an inquiry. And so the salespeople need the same ability you had, which is to thrash amongst the organization, give product feedback, and move the needle on professional services or whatever it is to close those customers. And you have that as the founder and CEO of your business, but you need to give that permission to your first few sales hires. Now, left unchecked for too long, and you got a crazy house, and that's another story entirely. But it's better to have a crazy house than no house at all.
Yeah, we actually take it a step further with our entire team. Every single person at my company spends at least 5% of their time doing customer success, because we want everybody to understand the customer. And by doing so, you'll see it permeate into the product, but you'll also see it come out in the narrative, right? The things that the sales team are saying back to the customer, trying to really close the loop between how an engineer interprets what the customer said and how the salesperson would like it to be said to the customer as well.
Yeah, no, this is great that we went in this direction, because this is a symptom I see a lot. Like, I'll speak to a CEO who will say, David, I think I need some sales training because I hired all these sales reps and they all suck. Okay, I was trying to grow and scale. They all suck. The only one that can sell anything is me, and I'm not the CEO. I'm an engineer. I'm not even a sales rep, right? And so sometimes the problem is the profile of sales rep they've hired. I don't want to say sometimes the problem is them, although sometimes it is them, because they haven't architected these kinds of processes where they're putting people in CS or helping them have empathy for the customer, right? So I think it kind of goes both ways. I want to kind of double click and just underscore that these CEOs have learned something about what it takes to make those first few reps successful. It's not just hiring the right person or people, but giving them the right kind of authority and exposure to their customers to make sure that they're in that good winning position. I'm curious, so we're talking about investors, so let's kind of pivot a little bit to that, right? So we have to start showing some results as we hire people. But, results kind of takes many forms. And sometimes in the early stages of a company, it's not all about revenue, right? Revenue is nice because revenue solves all problems, but sometimes there are leading indicators of success of things that we need to prove to our investors that we can do before we hit revenue. Sometimes it's, customer acquisition cost, like how many clients can we kind of bring in very quickly regardless of the size. I'm curious, when you kind of go back to those early days, what kind of metrics did you prioritize from a sales growth perspective? Did you prioritize perhaps over revenue or along with revenue?
Revenue is is always, I think, going to be the last thing you focus on in the early days. Before you have a product, 6 months leading into your product, you have a narrative, and you're trying to test that narrative out before you actually build something. Hopefully, you can try to build something, I guess, and then throw it out, and hopefully it works, but that's not how we did it. So we really cared about churn as one of our first things, and it wasn't churn from a revenue perspective. It was, did the customer actually enjoy using the product? Did they value the product? And if they valued the product, did the product move to their peers within the organization? So one thing that I really care about at Duality is virality. I really, really, really care about virality. I can go from a top-down approach into an organization and get the sales leader to use or to endorse the product and get his entire team to use that product. But the truth of the matter is, that's a forced approach, and salespeople tend to gravitate toward things that they like doing or things that they've done all their lives. And so we want to make sure that whatever we're building is really going to tie in with the way that they like to work as a first and foremost test point. So yeah, virality for me is the best possible measure. When we go into an organization, we'll start off with 1 user, and if things go well, we'll end up with 80. And that's like an amazing measure for me. So early days, I cared about that. And then once we figured out that, then I cared about virality from one company to another company. Dirty secret in sales, 25% of you are going to leave your job this year. That's a consistent stat in sales. 25% churn year over year. And if that happens, it's good for me and my business in that you're going to go somewhere else. So if you really liked what you're using at the company A, you'll hopefully take it with you to company B. So we want to see if it's going to jump the tracks.
I like that. You know, one of the things that we focused on in our third startup was this idea of love, and it's kind of funny to say, but we would do our customer surveys, and we wanted to see if we could get 40%, I think that was the magic number, 40% of people to use the word love to describe their feelings towards your product. Once you get that love, it's very difficult to kind of, extract them and also, promote some of that virality, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and so the other thing that we really cared about from a sales perspective, or we still care about it from a sales perspective, is owning the customer journey a little bit deeper. Again, that loop goes back into the engineering team for the earliest salespeople. So we want the salespeople to stay close to the customer through the very early parts of that journey, so that they can A, feed that information back to product, but B, so that they can learn the stories and the narrative that's actually resonating really well with the market. And the third part of that is if they own that customer journey, we see our retention rates on a new customer go from 40% up to 87%, which is extremely telling.
But I want to get to Mike, but before I want to just double click on that, because this idea of getting close to your customers is actually something we all talk about, but is not something that people pay enough mindful attention to. And it's this idea of when you're selling, it's helpful to have case studies and videos and testimonials and all these things that appear on your website. And if you're a sales rep, you're thinking, oh, this is great, I can send this to customers and so on. But unless you heard it directly from the mouth of the customer, face to face, you will lack the conviction you need in many cases to deliver that content, right, to your prospects. And so there have been experiments that have been done on this. Adam Grant did one at the University of Pennsylvania, the Wharton School of Business, where he basically took, they call, in the alumni department, they call recent grads and ask them for money, like I'm sure you've gotten calls from your alumni department asking you for money, and they have a BDR team that does that. And what they use the money for is they use it to fund scholarships at the university. But what they did was they said, you know what, I don't think the BDRs really understand what these scholarships are being used for and kind of what the impact they have, in the world is. So what they did was they brought in some former students who had received these scholarships to tell the BDRs the story of their career and what they did with that money. And they found that the revenue productivity in that BDR team increased 400% after they heard the stories firsthand. So I love the fact that you get close to your customers, hear the stories firsthand, and use the words that they use. You want to say something?
I was just going to agree with you 1,000%. I can tell you from the very early days at my previous company, Vision Critical, one of the very first clients that I signed was a company called the National Hockey League. You might have heard of them. And the NHL actually used our technology at Vision Critical to change a rule in the game. Nobody could tell that story better than I could because it was my story. And it helped us to win Major League Baseball, the NFL, NASCAR, NBA, PGA Tour, UFC, and so on, because they were all fascinated by how well that story tied into their business, but also how well I could tell the story.
Empathy is a beautiful thing. What are we talking about again? Is it sales?
We're talking about what
I was
metrics you
kidding,
may
I was
have
kidding.
prioritized over revenue.
Yeah.
We all got caught up here.
No, it's all good. This is a good one. So when we first arrived at Y Combinator, the kind of essence of the program is to remove all kind of the shit and the busy work of starting a company to the side. Just fucking ignore that stuff and focus on the most meaningful things that you need to chase in your business, which are going to be those KPIs. And pardon my French. The way it works with partner meetings is they actually only give you 20 minutes when you meet with any of the advisors at YC. And you're lucky if you actually get the full 20 minutes because they're hyper impatient. If you start wasting their time and dilly-dallying and like waffling on a decision, they'll get up and walk away because they have like 40 of these meetings a day. It's a hyper intense experience. And Paul Graham is the founder, and he was our assigned partner, and he wanted to go for a walk. It was a 20-minute walk up Pioneer Way in Mountain View. And me and my co-founders started following him along Pioneer Way, and we're all wearing our Vidyard shirts. We're with Paul Graham. We're like, wow, this is going to be so cool. It's Paul Graham. And he's like, all right, where are you guys at? And we're like, we've built our product, and we're starting to sell the product. He's like, awesome. Okay, so you've got a product in market, which wasn't fully true. We didn't actually fully have the product in market. I was just trying to impress Paul Graham. He's like, okay, so is it a free product, or are you selling a product? We're like, well, we're going to sell a product. He's like, awesome. You need to grow revenue by 10% per week. And he turned around and went back to the office. We had made it like 25 feet up the street, and that was the end of the meeting. And we were like looking at each other, and we're like, holy shit. Now we actually have to finish building the product so that we can start selling it and grow by 10% per week. I wish I didn't lie to Paul Graham. And so I'll never forget that. So then we like started going crazy. So what we were doing during YC is my co-founder Devin was, and TC, or VP Engineering, joined us shortly thereafter, would basically write code from like 6, 7 p.m. until the same time the following morning. And I would wake up and I would meet them and they'd show me what they'd built. And then I would try to sell it during the day. And I'd get all this feedback during the day from people and sign them up for the beta, whatever. And then they'd wake up at night and then I'd give them this feedback and then they'd go work on that stuff while I slept. And we were like a 24-hour machine where the only thing we cared about was growing revenue 10% per week. And so at the end of YC, we had this really nice hockey stick. And it was all because of that maniacal focus on growing that metric. But to grow that metric, we had to be customer obsessed because we had to build something people want, which is YC's mantra. I see so many startups get caught up in all the other stuff, which is busy work. Meeting investors before you're actually ready to raise money. Investors will tantalize you with this idea, and no offense to the venture debt guy, but you probably don't need to talk to him. Sorry, I'm just kidding. We'll tantalize you. We're going to help you find customers. We're going to do all these things for you, but that never comes to fruition because they have this whole portfolio they have to manage. They're just baiting you so they can put money into your company and suck the life and energy out of you for the rest of the tenure of the company. And so get super focused. And then once we realize, okay, we're able to scale revenue 10% per week, that starts to get hard at a certain point, by the way. It starts to get impossible because you're trying to grow the company 300% every 12-week period, 300% plus. We started looking at how customers were actually engaging with the product. And so are they uploading videos? Are they logging into the dashboard? Are they looking at analytics? And we started developing our own framework of KPIs for what a healthy customer was. And when somebody was active, we were like obsessed with spending time with them. And in fact, one of our very first customers was a woman named Donna Fung who worked at a company called Tribe HR. And I got so obsessed about learning from her, I ended up marrying her. And this is no joke.
True story.
And we take customer success very seriously, but it doesn't scale well. So I guess the TLDR on this whole thing is pick the one thing and get like crazy obsessed about it. Now, as a CEO, like I write our cash balance and like the amount of time we have left and our ARR on my bathroom mirror. And I see that every morning and I update it every week. And like I put these things front and center. And we were in YC, we had the same thing. The targets were front and center. Like we just got obsessed with them. And getting obsessed with growth is one thing, because if you just obsess over the growth and you're just doing the actions that you think require you to get there, you're not going to actually grow. It's all the pieces required that kind of create the activities you do every single day. And if it doesn't align to growing that key metric, you shouldn't be focusing on it. And that's the thing that YC is really good at doing, and that's the thing where I think a lot of Canadian startups ultimately end up failing on.
I love this. We're talking about accountability. We're talking about, and I'm not pointing at this guy specifically. We're talking about the investors, and one of the things, that I always found is that when you get called in front of like a board of directors. Now, just to kind of back up for a second, is anyone here like a venture funded company taking venture funding from anyone? Okay, a few? All right. So the idea is like when you take venture funding, the company, the venture capitalists are not just investing in the idea, it's a good idea, they're investing in the team, in the people that they think that can bring that idea to fruition and make them a lot of money. And so when you get up in front of them, it's like a little audition almost every time, right? It's show me the metrics, tell me the story, but they're investing in you personally. And I wish that, as a VP of sales, I was called in front of the board a bunch of times, certainly the executive team, and I wish that my team felt what that felt like, right? Because it drives a lot of accountability and preparation. You got to know your shit. And so I think about, as a CEO, driving accountability throughout your organization is really important, right? People need to, I don't know how many of your team members are writing, shit on their bathroom mirrors and kind of staring at it every day, but it's important for them to feel the same thing that you feel so that they can act with the sense of urgency they need to in order to succeed. So I'm curious, how do you go about driving that accountability in your organization? And even if, let's say, your organization, your CEO is not doing some of the things that they might talk about here, I think it's important for a sales rep or a leader to drive their own sense of accountability. So maybe you're going to hear some ideas that will help you up your sense of accountability and kind of help you, execute with that spring, with that source of urgency that you need. So I'm curious, what have you seen to drive that accountability?
So I'll say for us, accountability is first, foremost, and always to the customer. And from there, if you're getting that right, accountability to the investor is actually not that hard because you understand how your job relates to the customer and to the growth of the business. We do a pretty good job of trying to keep everybody engaged with how we're growing the business, what it means to be customer obsessed, what the product is ultimately trying to do. We want people to have that sense of purpose in their job. And we do a lot of the measurable things as well, which is just giving everybody a dashboard that they have to maintain and nurture. And I think by staring at it every week, if you suck or if you're doing well. We particularly focus on what we call DAO, WOW, MAU, which is daily active users, weekly active users, and monthly active users. And we look at the ratios between all of those things to see if they're shifting. If DAO to MAU goes down, that's a big concerning thing to me. And if it goes up, then I get pretty excited. So ultimately, we're looking for a 1-to-1 ratio. We want people using the product every single day. So what I've done, which I think is actually quite fun, is I've actually invited members of my team to speak with the board, which I think gives them a sense of what the heck it is we're doing.
Shit.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, totally. It's oh shit, right? You'll see them prepare quite a lot. And, they get pretty nervous when they do it. But once they do it, I think that they get an appreciation for why it's important to understand the questions that they're asking and how they relate back to the business. They all come in pretty prepared and pretty nervous, and they walk out feeling pretty good that they've done it.
That's great. I love the focus on again, you're hearing the same, I'm just trying to narrate, you're hearing the same things, focusing on the customer value, their story, and holding themselves accountable to the metrics that drive that success. I think that's great.
Yeah. I think early on, so a company is like a big bang where like the farther people get away from the original founding of the company, the harder it is to drive urgency and accountability in them because they just weren't there. And the type of person that joins a company at 10 people, a person's kind of a little crazy, right? Because they're like betting their job on this like little amoeba of a business that has like no proven track record. And the type of person that joins a 200-person company is very different. And if you had 200 people that were like the first 10 people, you'd have a madhouse. And so there's a lot of kind of give and take with respect to the way accountability gets managed. I think there's two things that I've seen in our organization. One, and like we are by no means a shining example of this, and I think about it constantly. And At times we've had great accountability and urgency, and at other times it feels like it's slipping, and there's like methods we've used to kind of bring it back into place. And I, as a CEO, think about this from the whole organization, but I'm very focused on sales, especially sales urgency, because we need to grow. We're a growth company, we're venture funded, like we live or die on our growth number. And so I think the two types of accountability is one, driving purpose around what you're trying to actually accomplish. And so what we've realized recently is that there's this big change coming, and this is not a pitch, this is just like a description of why I'm passionate about what we're doing, where there's a new generation of buyer and seller coming into organizations that is kind of mobile first and is using Snapchat and Instagram and these social tools to communicate visually with their friends. And they're using Giphies, and like business is becoming less formal with what we'll call the Generation Z. And they come into the workplace and they're given a computer and they're asked not to wear a hat and they're expected to do all these like formal things. And the only thing they've really used email for up until that point is to submit school assignments. And they don't know how to behave in that business context. And so, because they've just never had it, right? And the world has changed. And I used to use email to like chat with my friends. Like, I don't even know if people do that anymore. And so, as these kind of habits are coming into business, these like visual communication mediums are coming into business. Video is obviously a big part of that. It's what we do. We have this opportunity to like truly change the way businesses communicate. And that is really, really cool. And and this is going to happen, like video communication for businesses is going to be a big thing. Somebody's going to figure it out. And if we're not the ones to figure it out, oh my God, I'm going to like have regrets for the rest of my life. And if you believe the teachings of all these futurists, like that's going to be like 300 years, and that's going to suck. And so I have a ton of urgency around that, which is why I write these things on my bathroom mirror, and I try to communicate that in this way with the team on a regular basis. And so I'll do kind of like regular touch points. And whenever I'm feeling like we're losing urgency or accountability, we do a weekly stand-up with the whole team, and I'll just like insert myself into it with a bunch of jibber jabber and hopefully emblazon the team. The other thing that we use to manage accountability is the company culture. And not everybody is going to get on side with like this, wow, we're going to change the way businesses communicate strategy. Some people are going to find it hokey. I try to find those people and fire them. But there's also going to be passion for your brand and your company and your culture. And if you can get people passionate about working at your business and supporting each other and thinking about the upside and celebrating with the friends that they work with every single day, aligned to this concept of changing the way businesses communicate, then you're going to have accountability. And your job as a CEO is ultimately to drive that as much as possible. And it is a very difficult thing to do. But that's how I think about accountability at the highest level.
Yeah, I would just say for us, the two biggest values we have at our business are empathy and ownership. Empathy to the customer and empathy for each other. Ownership, I think that's pretty clear what that is. Own what you do, and hopefully the whole company will prosper a lot better if you actually own that whole process yourself. So empathy and ownership will really rule the day for us.
Yeah, it's this concept of almost what I call discretionary effort. So imagine you're kind of rowing in the canoe, and it looks like everyone's paddling pretty hard, but you know that some people are paddling more than others. And so the question is, how do you get people to paddle harder, even though it looks like everyone's kind of doing the same thing? It's this idea of if they feel aligned, if they feel bought in, then they will unlock that kind of sixth gear, and you'll get more out of them, right? And if they're not, then they're not only going to not get a lot out of them, they probably shouldn't be there, especially in very kind of culture-driven organizations. Question, so you talked about going, how long do we have, Ken? We got a few more minutes? Okay. Is that 2, 3? We'll see how it goes. So Mike was talking about visiting customers and going into meetings, and it's funny, every now and then I'll be at the airport and I'll run into a CEO friend and I'm like, oh hey, where are you going? And I'm like, oh, I'm going to this customer meeting. I'm flying all around. I'm like, oh, sales team bringing you into all these meetings? And they're like, nope, I just like to be there and make sure everything's going okay. Right? So if the CEO sniffs blood in the water, like, okay, I got to be at the meeting. But for many of us, we talked about at the beginning this idea of experience asymmetry. So we're selling to more senior level buyers whose job we've never done. And one of the ways we can equalize that experience asymmetry is by bringing in Our CEO, because the CEO can tell the story way better than we can. Heck, they started the company because they had the pain that the problem that the customer has, and they should be able to act with a lot more conviction. So the question I have for you is, how do you like to get involved in customer meetings? Do you typically sit back and wait for the sales team to involve you? Because I'm sure there's a lot of salespeople out here that are thinking, yeah, shoot, it would be awesome to have my CEO, in the right meeting, attend. But in other cases, you might kind of push your way into some meetings. So what advice do you have for the folks here for how best to use you in customer-facing situations, meetings? Chris, or Mike, or...
So I'll say that I get involved probably in more meetings than Mike does right now. You've got a bigger company, and it means that you're pulled in a million different directions. But
how many meetings a week do you do? Let's have a meeting off.
So we're comparing here. It's like a contest.
The big thing for me is I try to figure out what my role should be in that meeting. Am I trying to bring somebody along? Am I trying to engage a different buyer that they're having a tough time engaging with? So you're either going to go into a meeting as the coach, you're going to go in as the sponsor, you're going to go in as the color commentary person. Sometimes I go into the meetings and I don't say a bloody word, and I think that's actually really good because I think it means that everything is going really well. Other times I'll actually just whiteboard stuff while people are on the call. So that we can actually figure out how we can take what I'm whiteboarding and turn it into product, because what we are is real-time adaptive playbooks. So I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm playbooking for you right now. That's not in the product. Shoot, I got to put that in. So it really depends. The bigger the deal, the more likely I am to get engaged. And frankly, it's also, from my perspective, I find the more complex the deal is, the more exciting they are too. They tend to bring out the blood spirit in me. Like it's a real passion. For sure. Yeah. Heart's pumping.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. I think it really depends on the CEO. And so I have a stakeholder kind of part, very similar to you, which is customer, Vidyardian, community, shareholder. And that's the order that my calendar is arranged. And so I will take a customer meeting over a one-on-one, take a customer meeting over a community meeting, and I'll take a customer meeting over a shareholder meeting. And if you align those values and deliver value to your customers, then obviously everything else is going to shake out because your business is going to grow, it can support the community, it can help your team thrive and find new career opportunities, and your shareholders are happy because they're making money. And so what I've learned is I was getting invited to meetings, and then one of the reps who invited me to a meeting got fired 2 days after I went to said meeting. And a rumor started that if you invite Mike to a meeting and you don't perform well, you probably will get fired. And yes, there may have been a correlation in this particular instance.
Not causation, though, just correlation.
Yeah, and but that's a very difficult thing to manage because I am there in some way to watch the sales rep perform. And, there's like the sales rep is saying, bizarre things and clearly doesn't know how to run a meeting properly and like, whoa, what's going on here? This person just isn't good. Or maybe their pitch deck is kind of funky and maybe they're not listening, and maybe there's like small tweaks that can come along with how I perceive the sale to be going down. Now, I think it really depends on the CEO because you probably have some types of CEOs that come into the meeting and like want to own the meeting. And to your point of letting go of Lego blocks, that is not my approach. And in fact, I will never talk pricing with a customer because my sales rep has a commission plan, and my instinct is to give everything away for free. Right? I want this customer using this product. Wow, they got such a cool use case. My mission is to help them succeed with video. I don't want money to get in the way of that shit. Like, you just go do that. Whereas, that's a horror scene to them. And so I will never talk price. And so what I like to do is whiteboard out the vision of what we're building as an organization and how it aligns to their longer term plan. And so when a customer has a real vision for kind of like how to transform their business with video, that's when I'll come in and that's when I'll get really excited. But as soon as pricing comes up, I take a back seat and put a little smile on my face and watch the rep handle that. And so I think it really depends. But Devin and I still hold, I think, this not this myth, but we closed a very, very, very large deal with a very large customer early on. that is still the largest deal in the business. And that gives us the credibility to go into the meeting, even though we're not necessarily really great salespeople. And so I think what we're there for is really just to paint the vision of what we're doing as an organization.
Love it. So we have one more question, and this is just a kind of a high level. So you have a bunch of CEOs here, a bunch of salespeople in the audience. What's one thing, as a CEO, what's one thing that you wished your salespeople understood better about your journey, about your plight, about how you run your business and your operation, that would make them more empathetic towards the stuff that you have to go through? Want me to stall? I can stall.
No.
I can sing.
No. I think the thing is, I work for despite all these jokes I made about firing people and whatever, that's my job, but I work for the sales organization. And in fact, we're a product-led company. We're founded by 2 engineers, but our success depends on the success of the sales organization. And when I say that to salespeople, I really do mean it. And I get out of bed every single morning thinking about their attainment, because I know that if our reps are attaining, they're happy. If they're happy, they're going to bring better energy. They're going to be more successful. And to be happy and to be successful, they have to be attaining. And it's this kind of virtuous circle. And I think about them, I'm getting emotional, when I wake up in the morning and just before I go to bed at night. And I look at their performance, which is that ARR number, every time I look in the mirror. And so it's kind of like, God, I don't even know what I would do if Vidyard disappeared from my life tomorrow, because it's such a big part of my entire adult life, and everything I do is for those salespeople. So if you are in sales at Vidyard in this audience, I don't think there's anybody here. Just know that I care. And when I get all upset and frustrated about lack of attainment and stuff, it's just because I want you to succeed. I'm kind of like a disappointed dad, but I still love you, and we got this. That's my takeaway, I guess.
I love it. You're separating the personal relationship with the feeling. I love that. Chris, what do you say?
Yeah, I don't limit it to salespeople. I think that this is something that the entire company needs to rally around, which is purpose. And so it goes back to something that we were saying earlier. I truly believe that if people understand purpose, they can get behind what you do. And if they can't get behind what you do, then they're chasing the wrong purpose, and they need to find a different purpose that they should be pursuing. So, I come from a sales background. I've been in sales my entire life. I still am in sales. I will always be in sales to some degree. I've made a point to tell the sales leader that we are bringing into the business that I no longer run sales. I report to you in a sales capacity. You can give me a quota if you want to, and you can also fire me from sales if I'm doing a really shitty job, which means that I have to go and find somebody else to mess up in the company. But I think that if you go back to that whole underlying piece of what is it that you're trying to do and how is it going to make the customer's life better, you're going to get yourself further with people, and you're going to make it really easy for them to sell. Like my job is to make it really easy for people to sell, which means understanding the buyer journey from the outside in. I think a lot of people, particularly in the early days, when they have a new product that they're selling, they try to sell a product onto a customer. And that is the biggest mistake you could ever make. You have to sell a customer into your business. You have to make them adopt you. You're not adopting them. And so I always have this mentality of outside in selling. Always start with the customer. Understand their buyer role, understand who they are as a person, understand the business that they play in, understand the vertical that they play in, their company. Everything you can possibly understand about them will make you far more empathetic to their problems and their pains and their needs, and it will make it so you're not selling a product to that individual, but you're selling a vision and a dream. And I think that's a really, really, really important point to make, and I try to stress that to everybody in the business. This is not our company, this is our customer's company ultimately.
I love it. Now, if I can just double click on that for a second. So, what I'm hearing you say is you're selling feelings, right? You're selling the feelings. You're selling the vision, the conviction. People will buy in not because you have a great product. I mean, it's great if you have a great product, but they're buying into the why, right? The Simon Sinek, the why. They buy why you're doing it. And oftentimes in sales, we don't muster enough conviction. A lot of sellers do not muster enough conviction to convince the customer that this is something that they should do. So, I love that we're kind of drawing. You're taking up your microphone again. That's good. It's okay. We're drawing inspiration from the stories, the founder stories. Here's why we started the company. Here's why you should hang your hat on this thing. But I would submit to you that if you haven't found the thing that you have high conviction about in your product, in your solution, in your company, you need to find it. because conviction and certainty are very intoxicating, right? Often wrong, never in doubt. If I can speak with high conviction and passion about what I do, people buy that. People buy that. So the best advice I can give, if you remember on Seinfeld, remember everyone watched Seinfeld? Watch Seinfeld? So the episode where Jerry is trying to beat the lie detector, and he goes to his friend George Costanza and says, George, teach me how to lie like you. And what does George say? Not a lie if you believe it, right? So so I say that's what you need to, I'm not saying you should lie. I'm not advocating for lying. But what I am advocating for, and Mike is firing sales reps that don't have good meetings. This is the whole, we're going downhill. But no, the idea is whatever it is that your company does, you have to anchor it in that passion, that belief. And a lot of times you can that enthusiasm can be transferred from your CEO and from your customers, right? So get in front of the CEO, get in front of the customers, hear those stories firsthand. It's a very subtle thing, but it will help you execute with the emotion and the conviction that you need to convert buyers, especially at early stage companies where the product isn't fully baked, right? So we got Kenny's coming up with the hook. What do we got? What do we got next, Kenny? Q&A?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Before we do, I just want to give a quick round of applause to our amazing panelists, to David coming up on stage. David is like my personal analogy or storytelling machine. If there's ever a question about or a problem I have in sales, he will come ready with a story and some sort of analogy that will make it very crystal clear. And so I think he did a fantastic job tonight. So thank you very much, David, for coming up on stage and moderating. It's not easy, although I think it is because I don't do a great job. So, I personally worked for Mike, so as a testament, I mean, he did bring that energy every day. I was not the one that was fired, nor the hippie. Just want to make that clear. But I had a great time working there. So I want to open up the Q&A now for the next 10, 15 minutes to anyone in the audience. We have a couple of mics here, so we'll just run, the volunteers will run over. Go ahead, stand up.
All right, I'll start things off pretty simple. So dealing with large enterprise sales, at what stage in the cycle should you physically send someone if it's like a flight, like far away to meet a client? So at what stage you go from kind of your phone kind of conversations to actually flying out and meeting the teams you're going to be selling a product to? Enterprise being, let's do 100K plus deals.
And how big are you? What's the size of the company?
So right now we're 6 people, going to be 15 in 2 months.
Yeah, so my answer and what we did was, like if you're looking at a $100,000 deal and you're a 6-person company, you should be there in person. Absolutely.
So right at the first meeting and until the last meeting.
Yeah, I mean, right. I might differ from some of the more experienced sales leaders here, but are you sales CEO? What's your
engineering co-founder?
Engineering co-founder,
but thrown into sales role.
That's weird. Yeah, you might want to talk to your co-founder about that one. But yeah, I mean, for me early on, like if there was a sniff of an opportunity in enterprise sales that looked like that, I was on a plane. I was there because it was a learning opportunity to get in front of people that were like even a modicum interested in what we were doing, and that to me was even more valuable than the sale. So I traveled like a maniac initially for those kind of key enterprise deals. There was this one account, this big account I was talking about, is worth about $1 million a year for the business, and I visited them 55 times. But it was worth it.
And there's also ways you can be smart about it. So if you happen to be going to that particular city, you line up a whole bunch of other meetings, you kind of share a room. There's other ways of kind of spreading that cost of sale out. But the other thing to think about, and one of the reasons why you want to go on site is because you want to meet them in person. They want to see that you're a real person. They will tell you things that they will not tell you on the phone. But not to unnecessary plug for video and certainly for Vidyard. But this idea of seeing someone in person is a huge game changer that honestly people do not, I'm getting triggered now, people do not leverage enough. So I'll give you like a very simple example, a la Kenny here. So when you're driving in your car and someone cuts you off, okay, and you start saying things and acting in a way that would be inconsistent with how you are in regular everyday society because you're a nice person, right? Ask yourself, would you behave that way if you knew who the other person in the car was? I'm willing to bet that you would not. Okay, and so it's this concept called abstraction. When you're abstracted from this knowledge of who this person is, you behave in a way that is inconsistent. And if you're in sales, people, customers, by default, hate you, right? Because you're in sales. You're the enemy, right? And it's
the least trusted job in the world.
like tow truck drivers, salespeople, like it's in the same.
What?
Parking meter attendants.
Tow
Yeah.
truck drivers. You're gonna steal your car? Is that like the...
But so the way you can circumvent that abstraction is by doing video, and you either do like a video call, right? Like, hey, let's have a video call, because then they can see. Number one, they can see you. Now you're a person, right? So when they try to go dark, it's going to be harder for them to go dark because now you're like a real, live person. Maybe you look like someone they know. Maybe they saw some cool stuff going, on behind you in the, in the background. Mike has some awesome meeting rooms at his headquarters, and so it's just like very cool just to see. And all these things kind of engender you to the clients, and kind of, they get enamored with that. And even if you don't do it live, even if you send them, not to plug Go Video, but I use Go Video myself, Vidyard product is free, and you can send people like little asynchronous videos, and it's a huge game changer. So I would say, back to your question of getting on site, if you're looking for a cheap and cheerful way of kind of replicating a lot of the same kind of sales psychology, is just get in front of a video camera with your customer.
Yeah, so your cut point for doing face-to-face typically in an enterprise deal is about $25K. That's when they say that you can start to justify it, just based on the law of large numbers and the cost of travel, the cost of your acquisition, and so on. Just building on what you're saying, an email and a text message is probably the bottom of the food chain in terms of personalization. Your next level up is going to be to send them something that actually they can see you talk, they can see your eyeballs. So that starts to get into what Michael's company is doing to change the game, which is to have people engage with your content in a very different way. And then you take another step up, which is to do something like a Zoom conference where you're actually talking to the person live. Now you have eyeballs. And eyeballs are much harder to disrespect later in the sales cycle. You become more trusted. As soon as you've shook somebody's hand, it is very, very hard for them to see you as the enemy. Now you're on the same side, and you're trying to solve their problems. And I can tell you, we're working right now with somebody right at the top of the Cloud 100. And he is a shrewd buyer. One of the hardest buyers I've had to deal with in many years. As soon as I got the opportunity to meet him in person to person, which happened at Dreamforce this past September, our relationship magically changed, instantly changed, and he became an advocate for the business. So you can't discount that. I would say the other thing that you really need to consider when you're thinking about face-to-face meetings is, where is the deal? Is it real? And if it's not real, how do you know it's not real? So you do need to do some qualification up front before you hop on a plane, because you have a finite amount of money, particularly in the early days.
All right. Hey, guys. I'm Dave. Awesome panel discussion this evening. Really enjoyed it. And to mimic David's point a moment ago, huge fan of Go Video. I use it all the time. Awesome email, video integration. My question for you is, as CEOs, how do you use your Sundays, your average Sunday, and are you open to an initial outreach from a sales rep who's trying to get in front of you, either via email, social, or phone during your Sunday routine?
If somebody called me on a Sunday, I would kill them. I would be really unhappy. I have 3 children, so my story is going to be very different than others. I coach soccer, I coach baseball, and so I actually try to find some balance in my life on my weekends. My nights after the kids go to bed, I become, again, obsessed about the business. So, my wife would probably like to kill me sometimes. But no, I would say Sunday is probably not a good time for a phone call. Maybe not a bad time, particularly on a Sunday night when I'm starting to think about my upcoming week. An email might be effective because you're going to cut through a lot of the noise of my... I probably get about, I don't know what your number is, but I probably get about 200 emails a day right now. And the first 20% of those I almost discard immediately because they're almost all recruiters. It's the downside of announcing a funding round is that every recruiter in North America suddenly wants to help you find your talent. So yeah, I have lots of emails that I got to plow through every single day.
Yeah, you could try that on a Sunday. I'd probably ignore the phone call, but you might have a better chance at me looking at the email, for sure. Yeah, real simple.
Hi, good evening, guys. Chris, you mentioned that a new age mantra for successful salespeople is empathy, curiosity, storytelling, adaptability. But I'm curious to hear from you three. How effective do you think current salespeople are getting in adapting these?
I'm not sure I understood your question exactly.
So, as you said, empathy, storytelling, and so on have sort of become the new age success mantras for salespeople. Do you find that the trend is becoming more of that, or do you still find a lot of salespeople struggle to come to terms with those?
Some of those things I think you either have or you don't. I have 3 kids, and I can tell you they have varying degrees of empathy. My middle child has very little empathy, so I don't think that my middle child's going to be in sales anytime soon. But does he bust my ass when it comes to my personal commits to the business. I get a personal review from my middle child every single day when I get home from work. How's work? How's revenue? And it's like he's 11, and I'm like, fuck. He asks tougher questions than my investors do sometimes. So I don't know that you can teach all that stuff. You still have to have your traditional skills. We didn't really even touch on sales enablement today, but sales enablement is the fastest growing job in the sales world right now. And I think that it was always done off the side of somebody's desk, whether it was like a collaboration of marketing and product marketing and sales ops. That role is becoming so fundamentally important. The velocity with which you move today is probably your biggest advantage that you're going to try to maintain over your competitors. So how fast can you close a deal? How fast can you get somebody ramped? How fast can you blow people through different sales cycles and different stages in a deal? So the more effort you put into building a good enablement practice, which is a combination of education and empowerment of your reps, I think that you're going to find the efficacy of that's going to be the biggest thing other than the soft skills.
I think storytelling is super, super important. It's like the one thing everybody needs to work on. We're hardwired to listen to stories. When you ask David a question, he responds with a story. It's because you actually align to it. I don't know if you're familiar with YPO, but like you're not allowed to give each other advice. You're only allowed to tell stories that are relevant to the experience someone's having. And of course, at some point, everybody's just like, fuck it, you should just do this because it's so clear. Storytelling is something that people avoid as a skill because they're not necessarily comfortable with it. But I think it's something that you should absolutely invest in as a sales professional. And the best salespeople that we have are really good storytellers. And really great storytelling comes with really tons of great confidence. Yeah. Well, ask the questions that give them the opportunity to tell a very well-aligned story, like the NHL story. Yep.
My name is Sid. Mike actually worked with a colleague of mine, Graham. He works in Vidyard as well. So I got like a 2-part question. So as you mentioned, when you were in that growing phase, did you kind of feel that sense of accountability asked by your salespeople themselves because it was a smaller organization to start off with? And in terms of the second question is in terms of giving your product away for free, was that something that gave good returns to you? Was that something that led to customer acquisition in the long run?
Which is the one question you want them to answer? Just in the interest of time.
Whichever
you guys
one
can
you
choose
answer.
one of the questions each and then respond.
I can take the freemium question, and then I can talk to you afterwards about the other one. Going freemium with Go Video is something that we've done fairly recently in the business's cycle. So we were traditionally a top-down sell to CMO, VP Marketing, Director of Demand Gen. And we always wanted to have a piece of software that could enable other parts of the organization that came into the organization from the bottoms up. And so we didn't need Go Video to be successful as a business. We almost saw it as a loss leader initially to basically increase the number of people that had familiarity with our brand. And I'm sitting up here and I'm hearing both the people on the panel talking about Go Video. This gentleman here has had good success with it. Like, oh my gosh, our mission is to help businesses be successful with video, and there's people talking about what we're doing. This is like relatively new, and a year and a half ago, this audience, nobody would have had any familiarity with what we were and what we were doing. Now it's unfurled all these other really great strategies, and so Go Video is available in SalesLoft, soon to be Outreach, soon to be Inside Sales. We power all of HubSpot Video. There's like 30 of these integrations that all are points of access to new users in their existing workflows. And when people get to a certain point with the product, we do have an enterprise version that they can upgrade to, but we want to deliver 95% of the value for free. And you only pay for that extra 5%. And so the number of paid users to free users is like an abysmal conversion rate, but we don't care because we're playing for the big end. And you're absolutely right. The cost of acquisition of customers from the sense of a PQL, so product qualified lead versus a sales or a marketing qualified lead, over time, as you amortize the cost of developing that software, goes to zero. And that's a beautiful thing because our LTV, our lifetime value of a customer to CAC ratio, at the end of this quarter will be like 6 to 1. And previously, it was less than 3 to 1. And so it's had a massive impact on the success of our business. And then when we go and sell top down, there's likely people inside the organization that know who we are because they're using our product. And that little bit of brand affiliation just makes the deal that much easier to close. So it's all about multiple points of entry for us. And yeah, it's been very successful.
And freemium isn't just about creating a lead funnel. Freemium is about learning about your product and how your product works in different environments as well. So I would highly endorse a freemium model for what I do, just because I'm understanding how it gets used in different parts of a business, whether it be customer success or sales or solutions engineering and so on.